Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I hope you are doing well. I'm just wrapping up work for the day as I record this, and I'm so excited to let you know that registrations are now open for my annual immersive pranayama study program and the optional teacher training program that we run for yoga teachers every year. The registrations have just opened a couple of hours ago. So if you are keen on learning pranayama for yourself in a very structured, systematic, and effective way, and if you are a yoga teacher who's looking to incorporate this into your classes a little more, then make sure you check out all the details. Now, I have been looking at some of the questions you've been sending me on email and Instagram. This is completely a virtual course. It is 100% online. It is a combination of live Zoom sessions. The replays are available for those of you whose time zones don't work. You're working at the time that the class is happening. The replay is available. It will be uploaded the same day of class, and you will not lose value because you have watched the replay. You will get equal value whether you are in the live class or watching the replay. I do encourage live attendance because there's a live conversation and you get to meet community, but you can also do this on replay. You also have a pre-recorded content library that will be given to you once the course begins. We have, as always, all my programs have manuals, a checklist, a route map. We have done for you pranayama sequences. You get to build pranayama class plans that I will review and give feedback on, and even give you feedback on your pranayama class videos and teaching and things like that. There's a lot that's built into this course. Pranayama is deeply personal to me, my journey with it. I've spoken about it on the podcast before, but I'll save that story for another time. So enrollments are open. It begins on January 9th, which is literally less than a month away as I'm recording this. It starts on Tuesdays. It's for 6 weeks, 6 Tuesdays, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Pacific time. And all the other details are online. We're currently enrolling with the early bird pricing, and I'd love for you to get your spot when we've got the early bird going. So check out all the details online. You can look at the details in the podcast description. You can find it in my newsletters, on my Instagram handle. It's pretty much anywhere you connect with us. I would love to have you in this program. It runs from January 9th to February 13th. It's once a week, and it will change how you view pranayama and do pranayama for the rest of your life. I really hope you will take a moment to consider it. I will be doing a pranayama info session a few days before the live training launches. The early bird price will run out by then. So if you know for years you followed this podcast and my Instagram reels and clips, and you know this program is for you, then make sure you go ahead and sign up. On the show today, I have another pranayama conversation lined up for you. We get into a theory segment. Again, what you will hear on the other side of the intro is a sneak peek of what you will get in the training. So I hope you find this valuable. We'll be exploring the different groups of pranayama and how it's laid out and how it's structured. So enjoy. I will see you on the other side. Hi, my name is Arundhati, and you're listening to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I'm an ex-Bollywood dancer turned yoga and wellness educator. I've built a 6-figure business as an immigrant, woman of color yoga teacher with no business background, no handstands, pure instinct, and the free information found on Google. If you love doing yoga and you dream of teaching it someday, this podcast is for you. We go over everything from doing and teaching yoga to scaling a small business, living a modern yoga lifestyle, and so much more. You'll find interesting, fun, raw conversations along with some tips, tricks, strategies, and insights in this podcast. So grab your cup of chai and let's jump in. Welcome back. Today's pranayama class is all about the 3 groups or types of pranayama practices. If you didn't already know this, there are many different types of pranayama practices. Essentially, these pranayama practices are different breathing techniques, and each practice has a slightly different goal. ancient yogis were immensely gifted and wise, and they realized really early on that the varying states of our bodies and minds needed different conditioning at different times. So they took into account how varied we were as a people, and they even predicted many obstacles that we'll face in our practice, and they left us with a rich bank of pranayama knowledge and practices that we can use today. The issue is most practitioners and teachers, they get overwhelmed or confused with pranayama because there are many techniques to learn. But here's the thing. You don't have to learn everything, and just a few techniques can last you a lifetime. Okay. And that's because each technique in pranayama, each pranayama itself has so many layers to it. There are preparatory practices, beginner levels, intermediate practices, advanced levels, and just each practice has so many layers below it. And once you understand how pranayama practices are grouped or categorized, then it becomes a lot more predictable and easier to decide which pranayama to do when. Okay. Pranayama sequencing is a real thing. Okay. And pranayama sequencing is important for anyone who wants to learn and do and maybe even teach pranayama. Okay. So one of the primary things to know before you even try to sequence pranayama is to understand these three categories, the three main categories of pranayama. Okay. And remember, just as when you learn something new in yoga or in life, it takes some time to really get comfortable with it. But you always want to move from a point of confusion or not knowing to a place of clarity. Okay. And that's the mark of a good training, a good teacher. And pranayama is often better learned under the guidance of a teacher versus just learning it from a book. And because a teacher can regulate your knowledge, and a pranayama practice, you will run into certain obstacles, or you might have questions that you'll need answers for that you can't find right away in a book. Okay. So it's really important to learn pranayama under the guidance of a skilled teacher. Now that we've set the stage, okay, let's get into the three main groups, types, categories, or families of pranayama. Okay. Essentially, pranayama practices that have certain similarities or similar end goals are grouped together. Just as you have in your physical practice, in your asanas, different groups of poses like standing poses, back bends, inversions, etc. Similarly, in pranayama, you have three different groups. Okay. And if you're multitasking, this is really important. So come back to me here. The three main groups of pranayama are classical pranayam, vitalizing pranayam, and tranquilizing pranayam. Okay. Classical, vitalizing, and tranquilizing. Each pranayama practice you do will fall into one of these three categories. Literally, every pranayama out there today will fall into one of these three categories. Okay. So let's explore each of these groups in a little more detail. Let's begin with vitalizing pranayamas. Okay. Because once you listen to this podcast, I want you to walk away feeling, oh, that was actually easier than I thought it would be to understand. And that's what I strive for in every training that I offer, to really simplify and make this accessible and practical so that you can bring it into your life, your practice, your teaching effortlessly. Okay, so here goes. Vitalizing pranayamas are also called energizing pranayamas because the inherent quality of these practices are they make you alert. They revitalize the body, the mind, and the spirit. They wake you up quite literally and figuratively. They're also heating practices. They build agni or fire within your body, and they often are active pranayamas, and they require a certain skill, control, restraint to practice and to perform. I'm going to name a few energizing pranayamas and give me a virtual high five if you know these or if you've done them. The most popular ones out there today that people can recognize right away are practices like Kapalabhati, Bhastrika, and Surya Bheda Pranayama. Okay. And don't worry if you don't know what Kapalabhati means or what the practice is about or Bhastrika or anything else I name. Each of these are in the training, they're in depth. We go into the different stages and the many different ways to approach this practice. Okay. So a simple way to remember these practices or these vitalizing pranayamas is the practices that fall in this group. They're usually done in the morning because these pranayamas wake you up. Okay. They also need to be done on relatively an empty stomach, and the quantity of energizing pranayamas or heating pranayamas have to be regulated. And also this group, this particular category, the vitalizing or energizing pranayamas, they do come with certain contraindications, especially with certain medical conditions. And while I believe most pranayamas are accessible to most people, this group, we need to make sure we know who needs to not do it. Okay. Again, something we'll go in depth with at the training. So the second group of pranayamas are the tranquilizing pranayamas. They are also called cooling pranayamas. They mainly target the parasympathetic nervous system, and they really help trigger the rest and digest response. And they have a calming influence. Okay. Because they are cooling in nature, they are applicable to a wide variety of contexts. And in today's world of overstimulation, these pranayamas are just so significant. Okay. There are more tranquilizing pranayamas than there are energizing pranayamas. And I'm going to name a few. And don't worry if this doesn't make sense to you right away. Again, I go in depth into so many tranquilizing pranayamas in the training, but the more widely recognized or visible ones nowadays are Brahmari, Shitali, Shitkari, Chandrabheda, and something I'm sure you've heard of, Ujjayi Pranayama. Okay. I know you're thinking, wait, Aru, isn't Ujjayi heating? Well, I get into the nuances of Ujjayi Pranayam in my teacher training, and it is in the traditional or classical categorization of pranayama. Ujjayi is considered to be a cooling pranayama. Okay, but we'll talk about it more in the training. There are the ones I mentioned. These are just a few. There are so many more tranquilizing pranayamas, and these tranquilizing or cooling pranayamas, they are more universally applicable. They have lesser contraindications, and they are easier. A lot of these cooling pranayamas, they're easier to practice than some of the vitalizing pranayamas. So I would say this group of pranayama is more beginner friendly. And the third group of pranayamas in these three groups is classical pranayama. Now, classical pranayama is a unique category by itself because there is only one pranayama that dominates this group. Okay. It's the king of pranayamas called Nadi Shodhana, alternate nostril breath. Sometimes in certain schools known as Anulom Vilom. But I know what you're thinking right now. You're like, but Aru, isn't it inhale through your left nostril, exhale through your right, and then you inhale right and exhale through your left, and that's the whole thing? Well, you're kind of right. Okay. But here's the thing. There are literally 20 plus or more than 20 stages of Nadi Shodhana on a very conservative count. Okay. There is this pranayama is so detailed that it's actually divided into preparatory stages, beginner friendly stages, intermediate practices, advanced practices, and then the amount of layers and combinations and stages it has is a lot. Okay. It's just that in modern yoga, we want to cherry pick and make one thing more popular. And hence Nadi Shodhana, only one aspect of it is brought forward. And if you go back to episode 42, where I talk about pranayama, and that free practice and class notes episode, I go in depth into the preparatory stages of Nari Shodhana and what happens after the alternate nostril basic version is done, what comes next, and how the practice actually progresses. Okay. I'll link to that in the show notes. So wherever you're listening to this podcast, just look for the show notes and you'll find the link to that episode. If this is interesting to you, I highly recommend that you listen to that episode right after this one. It's been one of my I love teaching pranayama, so I feel really excited to put these mini lessons on the podcast. So there you have it, my friends, the 3 main groups of pranayama. This was just to give you a teaser of what it feels like to have a front row seat in my upcoming pranayama immersion and teacher training. Thank you so much for tuning in. The Pranayama Yoga Teacher Training starts on January 9th, 2024. The early bird pricing is ending December 30th, 2023. You can find all the details at letstalk.yoga/show notes, or just look for all the links in the podcast description. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please give it a rating and a review. It always helps us to bring this podcast to many more. I will see you next week. I have a very exciting conversation lined up with a guest that I am sure you will enjoy. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.